Yo, so the Black Phone. This was a film. I mean, it is a film. You know what I mean? From Scott Derrickson. He directs and he co-writes with C. Robert Cargill. The film is then produced by Scott Derrickson, C. Robert Cargill, and Jason Bloom. It is co-produced by John Romano and Jennifer Scudder Trent. Executive produced by Joe Hill, right? Ryan Turek and Christopher H. Warren. Mark Corvin took care of the score. Brett Jackowicz was down with the cinematography. Right, Frederick Foraval edits the piece with Sarah Domia Lindo and Terry Taylor handling the casting. Production design is Patty Podesta. Jonathan Guggenheim was art direction. Right, set decoration we have Marth Pinu, Amy Andrews handled costumes. Right, hair and makeup is Jeff Goodwin, Priscilla Green, Michelle Johnson, Rick Poor, Tony Rosen, Weldon Steinick, Jason Willis, Matt Barrett, Ash Christ, Dylan Gillis, Christina Mayer Holland, and Jennifer McCollum. Okay, so then we have got what would be next? Okay, so Kelly Barksdale, Tim Bell, Richard Butcher, Pat Chu, Benjamin Hinat, right? Daniel Locero, David Brian Martin, Alex Megley, Carl Anthony Nesboli, Mark Riccardi, Chris Schmidt Jr., Noah Schultz, Ben Tardif, and Ben Zogorecki. They were all behind the stunts, right? Stunt doubles, all of that jazz. And that takes us to our cast. Okay. Boy, the cast was very good. You know what I mean? So we have Mason Thames as Finney, right? His sister, Gwen, is played by Madeline McGraw. Who else do we have? Okay, I think his dad is Terrence. Yeah, I think that's his dad. I mean, I down, you know, their last name and then Mr. blah blah or whatever. Because I don't know if they, refer to him as Terrence in the film. But anyway, Terrence is played by Jeremy Davis, right? And have got Ethan Hawke as the grabber. Right? James Ranson is Max. Right? We have got Detective Wright, played by E. Roger Mitchell. Detective Miller is played by Troy Rudisill. We have Terrence. We have got Robin, played by Miguel Cazares Mora. Bruce, played by Tristan Pravong. Billy, played by Jacob Moran. Vance, played by Bradley Hepner. Griffin, played by Banks Repita. Right. There is Donna, played by Rebecca Clark. Moose, played by J. Gavin Wild. Buzz, played by Spencer Fitzgerald. Matty is played by Jordan Isaiah White. Matt, played by Bradley M. Ryan. Mr. Hopkins, played by Parish Stykelever. Mrs. Fulgrim, played by Christina Arjana. Principal Keller, played by Sheila O'Rear. Right, the Chief of Police, played by Rocco Poveromo. Sally's mum, played by Nina Repeta. Yeah, I think that's our main lot of the cast. Okay, so the gist of Finney Blake is a shy but clever 13-year-old boy who is abducted by a sadistic killer and trapped in a soundproof basement where screaming is of no use. When a disconnected phone on the wall begins to ring, Finney discovers that he can hear the voices of the killer's previous victims, and they are dead set on making sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to Finney. All right, so that is the film. Right now, this is actually a adaptation of a short story. Right, it's a short from Joe Hill. It has the same name, right? It was called The Black Phone, and it was part of an anthology called The 20th Century Ghosts. And this came out in 2004, I believe. Right, so I think what I read, right, Derrickson had, he liked the story, right? He wanted to adapt it, but he couldn't think of what else to add, right? There's, it's a short story, so you need to fill in some gaps and all of this, right? But the rest of the ideas came to him after he left the Doctor Strange sequel, right? He directed the first Doctor Strange. I think that was the first I came across Derrickson. Yeah, I know he's been doing his thing for a minute, right? I can't think of other things that I might have seen by him. I mean, recently there was that Apple film, The Gorge, and he did have a short film in not the most recent VHS anthology series, but the series before that. But yeah, but after Doctor Strange, I was just like, yo, I dig his shit. So, you know what I mean? I was definitely intrigued by the idea of The Black Phone, right? Especially it's an original concept, as it were, or like with the adaptation and everything like that. But, it's horror. So, like, I don't always gravitate to them, even though I know we have covered a whole heap on here, but it is just one of those things. But yeah, the sequel is dropping, so I was like, I'm going to give this a look. And I will say, there is a lot to like about this film. You know, lot to like about this film. Like, it's set in 1978. Good year, definitely a good year, right? And I think that's helpful because, you know, you don't have Google Maps, you don't have smart devices. So trying to track like someone that's missing, nigh on impossible. Right, back then it's all about the clues and chance, and you know, just it was harder, so much harder back then than it is now, and it's not easy now. You know what I mean? But there are definitely things that will help more. So if you said it things in the past, you don't have to deal with technology and all of those kind of things. Right? There's also something about the past, right? Because I think when you think like all the stuff that we know about now, I like all of that was happening back then, but we didn't have access to that knowledge, right? You had the local news, right? So you knew, you know, the stuff happening on your doorstep, but not far flung afield, you know? So there is something about setting things, you know, in like the 60s, 70s and all of that kind of jazz. Like there's that innocence, you know, but underneath is that murky underbelly. And this one, like we start off and they're playing, there's a baseball game, Little League. Right, so we have Finney playing. He's a pitcher, and his interactions with, you know, some of the other kids, right? And so from there, you know, we have him at school, and you can see he's quiet, shy. He doesn't want to get into fights, right? He gets beaten up and picked on, you know. But I will say at the start, I was kind of irritated by Finney, right? Frustrated the fuck out of me because he doesn't do anything to stop his dad beating on his sister, you know. And his sister, you know, she helps him out in a fight. But he then doesn't do anything and she gets beaten up, right, on his behalf. But yeah, like those things were very frustrating. You know what I mean? Because you're just like, yo, help your little sister, you fuck. You know what I mean? But it does show you, though, the timidity of Finney, right? Of Finn. And that's why we get this arc in the film of him kind of discovering that strength that he had. But yeah, so we have this situation of all of these kids, they're going missing, right? They're being grabbed by someone, but no one knows who. And, you know, again, like it's set in the 70s and there doesn't seem to be the same level of I don't know, surveillance, of care, of, because you would think if kids are going missing, the school would hold a big assembly and be like, yo, don't go anywhere alone, right? Walk around in pairs and groups and look after each other, right? You think there'd be stuff, but it wasn't. And so more and more kids are going missing until one day Finn gets grabbed. And, you know, the grabber uses that age-old technique to do it, right? So Finney gets grabbed. So then it's like this intrigue of what happens next, right? Now, it was interesting the way that they brought the grabber to life because, he's got a very unassuming voice, right? They didn't try and get Ethan to do some murky, grimy, menacing tone or anything like that, which if you bumped into the grabber out and about, I don't think you would think anything of it, right? So we get this intriguing kind of thing with the grabber and like his appearance, right? How he kind of talks with, Finn and the other kids and just all of this, which makes you think there's something underlying there too. Now, we don't delve into the background or history of the grabber, but you imagine there is something crazy there, you know what I mean? Just on the actions that we see. But, it's all around this phone that's ringing. And the interesting thing is, we're getting this information, but it is how these breadcrumbs are utilized. You know what I mean? That's the thing that's very intriguing. In that regard, it kind of reminded me of Dune Messiah, right? Like, I love that book. It's so great. And it's so different from Dune and so much shorter. But we have all of these events, building. And we've got to this point and it's just like, how is this getting resolved? And then like dominoes, everything just falls into place and you're like, whoa, that was crazy. And we get a similar thing with this, right? It's built to a point where you're just like, where the fuck do we go? And then all of a sudden, pow, 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 right? Everything. And you're just like, oh my gosh, that's so smart, right? That's really clever. You know what I mean? And so you get this very satisfying kind of conclusion to everything. You know what I mean? And I think what we also get, right? So we get this completion of this character arc, but the film, because it's very dark, right? And the ending is, there is still this kind of shadow over everything. Because it's kind of satisfying, but it's also, oh my God, like what are the ramifications going to be from this? Because no one walks away untouched. You know what I mean? So it's that like, oh boy, which I think is good because in any kind of kidnapping situation, no one's going to be the same after that shit. You know what I mean? Like the family, the acquaintances of the family, the community, everything is just going to be different, Now, I think Mason Thomas does a very good in his role, right? Because you have to have that timidity, that, there's that hope, that longing, just all of those things, the frustration, just he gives us all of that. But I will tell you who shines so bright in this film. Frigging Madeline McGraw, right? His little sister Gwen. Now, a lot of times people talk about, you know, girls in films, right? Women in films, and how you don't get heroes, and, you know, it's not on the same level. But Gwen is so badass, right? She is the hero of the piece. She's the one defending Finn, right? Throwing herself into the fire on so many occasions. And, you know, she's tiny, right? So we get that, you know, that kind of fear of situations. But then, you know what I mean? Like when her dad was beating her, and, you know, he's like, oh, what, who, where? And she's, you know, snarls back, right? There's that like, stop pushing me around. But then she still knows, I can't do anything about this situation. And freaking McGraw just gives us so much emotion in all of these scenes, right? That rage when she's coming to her brother's defense, just everything. It is such an incredible performance. I mean, she stole the show in this frigging film. You know what I mean? She really did. It was fantastic, right? The color palette of this, just, there's a lot about this film that really works. Really does work. You know, there are things that you do kind of wonder about, like the whole freezer situation and the noise, right? You're just like, okay, but how? What? You know what I mean? So there are things that I think don't necessarily always add up, but on the whole, this was a really a well put together film. You know what I mean? It really was. And you can see why it was a success. Now, I don't know if when you get to the end, you can see a logical sequel. So it's going to be interesting to see how they continue this. You know what I mean? But hey, we're going to find out soon. You know what I mean? But yeah, if you're like me and you hadn't got round to watching it, I definitely recommend people go check out The Black Phone.